Some children were not abused. They were just invisible. No one hit you. No one screamed at your face or locked you out of the house. In fact, if someone asked your parents how you were doing, they would have said, fine. They would have meant it. And somehow, that's the part that's hardest to explain. Because from the outside, everything looked fine. But you grew up with a quiet, persistent feeling that you were somehow not quite there. Not quite real. Not quite worth turning toward. You weren't dramatic. You weren't broken. You were adapting. And if any part of that just landed somewhere inside you, this is for you. Here's what most people misunderstand about emotional neglect. It doesn't look like anything. There are no visible bruises, no explosive memories, no clear before and after moment you can point to. Your parents were probably present. They fed you, drove you to school, maybe even came to your recitals. They weren't cruel. They were just somewhere else. Even when they were in the same room. This is what psychologists call emotional invisibility. Not absence, not abuse, just a consistent, quiet pattern where your inner world, your feelings, your fears, your needs went largely unacknowledged. You didn't get yelled at for crying. You just learned, slowly, that crying didn't lead to comfort. So you stopped. Not because you were strong, because you were smart. Because your nervous system is extraordinarily good at learning what works and what doesn't. And when what doesn't work is asking for help, the brain files that away. The child who grows up unseen doesn't become a child who falls apart. Usually, they become the opposite. They become the easy one, the one who causes no problems, the one teachers describe as so mature for their age, the one who figures things out alone because they learned early that figuring things out alone was simply what you did. From a nervous system perspective, this makes complete sense. When a child's emotional needs are repeatedly met with silence or distraction, or a subject change, or a tired look, the brain doesn't conclude that needs are bad. It concludes something more subtle and more damaging. That your time's needs are the problem. And so the survival strategy becomes suppression. You learn to shrink your emotional footprint, to take up less space, to be low maintenance, to need quietly in private, where no one has to be inconvenienced by it. Psychologists call this avoidant attachment. But it doesn't feel like a psychological pattern when you're living it. It just feels like being independent, like being realistic, like being the kind of person who doesn't burden others. And here's the part nobody tells you. That adaptation, the one that kept you functional, capable, self-sufficient, follows you into adulthood, not as a wound you can see, as a personality trait you're proud of. You become the person who says, "I'm fine," before anyone asks. The person who helps everyone else process their emotions but goes quiet when someone turns the question back to you. The person who is somehow always the strong one in the room, who finds it easier to give than to receive. Who gets uncomfortable, genuinely uncomfortable when someone takes care of you because some part of your nervous system doesn't quite know what to do with that. You're drawn sometimes to people who feel familiar, people who are emotionally just out of reach, people you have to work a little to get close to. Not because you enjoy the distance, but because distance is what you grew up understanding as intimacy. It's the shape love took. And the brain is always searching for the familiar shape, even when that shape leaves you quietly aching. You weren't broken. Your nervous system was doing exactly what nervous systems do. It was building a map of the world. And the map it had was, connection is uncertain, needs go unmet, self-sufficiency is safety. In America especially, this pattern runs deep. Many parents of previous generations were taught explicitly or implicitly that emotions were indulgent, that telling a child stop crying was toughening them up, that achievement was love, that providing materially was the same as providing emotionally, and many parents were simply exhausted, working multiple jobs, carrying their own unprocessed pain, moving through a culture that never taught them to sit with feeling. This is not about blame. Parents who couldn't meet your emotional needs were often people whose emotional needs had never been met either. The pattern passes down through generations quietly, invisibly, like a family inheritance nobody agreed to accept. But impact doesn't require intent. You can be loved and still be unseen. Those two things can be true at the same time. And understanding that really sitting with that is one of the quieter, more disorienting realizations of adult life. The deepest wound of the ignored child is not that they were unloved. It's that they cannot find the wound. Because nothing dramatic happened. There's no single story to tell at therapy, no clear event to point to, no permission granted to say, this affected me. So instead, they do what they learn to do. They minimize. They rationalize. They say things like other people had it so much worse and use that as a reason to dismiss their own experience entirely. But emotional neglect doesn't need to be severe to leave a mark. It just needs to be consistent. And the children who were consistently overlooked, who consistently internalized the message that their inner life was not worth attending to, often spend decades not knowing how to name what's missing. Only knowing that something is. You didn't need less. You just stopped asking. Think of the behaviors that emerged from that early learning as a kind of emotional autopilot, like a thermostat set to a certain temperature, not because the temperature is comfortable, but because it's what the house has always been. Hyper-independence is that thermostat. People-pleasing is that thermostat. The compulsive over-explaining, the apology before the ask, the practiced self-sufficiency, these are not personality flaws. They are the emotional climate you grew up in, still running in the background. The nervous system is not dramatic. It doesn't label things as good or bad. It labels them as familiar or unfamiliar, safe or unsafe. And what was familiar? Taking care of yourself, needing nothing, being easy, registers as safe. Even now, even when it costs you. What changes as you get older is not the pattern. It's your awareness of it. Somewhere in your 20s or 30s or sometimes much later, you start noticing the gap between how capable you look and how unknown you feel, between how well you understand other people and how poorly you understand your own needs, between how easy it is to be there for others and how difficult it is to let others be there for you. That noticing is not a crisis. It's the beginning of something, not a fix, nothing so tidy as that, just a shift. A slow recognition that the map you built as a child was drawn for a world that no longer exists, that you survived something that didn't look like surviving, that the silence you grew up in was real, even if it left no marks anyone could see. You were not high maintenance. You were not dramatic. You were not asking for too much. You were a child, and children need to be seen, not just fed, not just clothed, not just present for, but genuinely, attentively, curiously seen. The longing that lives in you, the one that's hard to name and harder to admit, is not weakness. It's simply the echo of something that should have been there and wasn't. And knowing that, really knowing it, letting it land without immediately explaining it away is not indulgence. It is the most honest thing you might ever allow yourself. If you grew up invisible, you didn't grow up wrong. You grew up adapting to what was there. That's not a flaw. That's survival. And now, quietly, you get to learn what it's like to be someone worth looking at, someone worth turning toward, not because you fixed yourself, but because you finally understand what was missing. And understanding, even without answers, is its own kind of arrival.